Hello, my name is Christopher Bolduc, and today I will be discussing various historical factors that led to the creation of Johann Sebastian Bach's 6 sonatas and partitas for solo violin. In this presentation, I will touch on topics ranging from the history of violin as a whole to historical documents that discuss the potential origins of the sonatas and partitas with their respective manuscripts. We will also look into various pieces by other composers which Bach was familiar with and potentially took influence from. Since the 14th century, there have been written accounts of musical instruments played with the bow, which was animal hair held between two ends of a stick in order to cause a string to vibrate. The creation of the violin was a result of evolution. It started with the viol family, beginning with a bass viol, viola di gamba, and a viola di braccio. The picture on the top is an example of the various instruments in the viol family. Through experiment and trial and error over details like sound production, size, string amount, and playability, the violin was born. The credit for the first violin is usually given to the Cremonese luthier named Andrea Amati, who had made his name originally as a lute builder. He created at least 2 3-string violins in the 1540s. The primary woods used in violin making are spruce and maple. Spruce is chosen for the top, also called the front, table, or soundboard. It is light in weight, yet longitudinally strong and laterally flexible. To the eye, the most prominent feature of a spruce top is the darker vertical graining. Maple or poplar is cut tangentially on the ribs and used for the back. The figure, the flame or curl, is the most prominent feature of maple. Spruce or willow are used internally for blocks and linings. The bass bar and sound post are spruce. The fittings, including pegs, tailpiece, and end button, are made of any dense hardwood, most commonly ebony, rosewood, or boxwood. For fingerboards and tailpieces, the early Italian makers used maple or other lighter hardwoods like poplar covered with maple, or dyed wood veneer since ebony was hard to find. Italy has long been the center of violin making. The Amati family were credited with solidifying the modern conception of a violin, and then other makers experimented with their models from there. The neck of a Baroque violin is straight versus a modern neck, which is angled down. Because of mechanisms due to physics, a neck angled down means more sound production. The main difference, though, is in the choice of strings. Modern strings are covered with a synthetic lining, either silver or titanium. Baroque instruments use animal gut strings, made from either sheep or cow. Gut strings produce a much more nutty, raw, and complex sound. Baroque strings are also much more unreliable and don't stay in tune as well. The sound post and bass bar in a modern violin is also slightly thicker, which helps the lower register project more. Baroque violinists didn't use chin rests. The violinist Louis Spohr invented them in the early 1800s to allow for more hold. The chin rest was invented because there was a need to hold the violin more securely because of an increase in virtuosic shifting passages. Above is an excerpt of Henrik Schering playing the Brahms Violin Concerto, which was completed in 1878, well past the time of Bach. The music requires the soloist to play up and down the fingerboard. In order for a large downshift to occur, the violinist must hold the instrument with his or her neck to allow the arm to relocate to a different position, hence the creation of the chin rest. The frequency of the bass A has changed throughout the years. Baroque tuning was somewhere around A equals 415 Hz, which differed from place to place and time to time, where the modern violin is tuned anywhere from A equals 438 to 445 Hz. Baroque bows were mostly made with snake wood. Modern bows are crafted with pernambuco wood. Both have horsehair attached, which is the tool in which violinists generally use to create sound. The sound is created when a player glides the bow hair across the string at various speeds and pressures that allow the string to vibrate. Modern bows are longer than Baroque bows and have different fittings. The Baroque bow is tapered off at the edge, so you get a different, generally softer attack, also because it is made from a denser, less flexible wood than pernambuco. There are many different styles of Baroque bows. The bow wasn't standardized until the 1800s. The bow was one of the fundamental impacts on the development of sound and tone projection in the 18th and 19th centuries. Now we will discuss the history of Johann Sebastian Bach's 6 sonatas and partitas for solo violin. They were often transcribed for other instruments, and there is a possibility that Bach himself actually transcribed the movements for keyboard instruments. Some scholars suggest that these compositions were intended as practice material for violinists. Others believe that they were meant for performance, either as dance suites or played in churches. Sonatas, or song without words, contrast with cantatas, which were written for singers often with accompaniment for the church. Over time, the sonata acquired the meaning of referring to a work for solo instrument, and possibly an accompanied one, usually by a piano. Each have 4 movements, beginning with a slow movement and ending with a fast one. Each have a central pair of movements, one a fugue and one a slower, more graceful movement. Partita, meaning divided into parts, are dance suites written for a solo instrument. Parte, meaning part or section. Partita was originally the name for a single instrumental piece of music. Johann Kuhnau and other later German composers used it for collections of musical pieces, which became essentially a synonym for the suite. The partita could have perhaps been one way that freed Bach from limitations of form. The partita appeared to be a place where he could let his imagination soar. The partitas also show that Bach had knowledge of dance forms which originated in other Western European countries, despite the fact that he only lived in Germany for his entire life. Now on to the origins of the manuscripts for the solo violin sonatas and partitas. Bach's original manuscript of these works were dated 1720 and titled Sei Solo, which means you are alone. There is no conclusive agreement on the year of the composition, but it surely was in 1720. It is probable that Bach produced this manuscript for his own use. The handwritten score is available on IMSLP to everybody for free. This score is thought to be lacking in articulation marks and other conventions, but is nonetheless the go-to for players when confronted with musical and technical concerns. We can assume this manuscript, as shown above, belonged to Bach's granddaughter, Christina Louisa Bach. Eventually, this manuscript came into the possession of Wilhelm Rust in 1890. This manuscript is considered to be the one with the highest authority by most scholars. Another manuscript is a copy of the original by Anna Magdalena, Bach's second wife. It contains markings by the violinist George Heinrich Ludwig Schwanberg, likely for his own use. This source also dates a copy of the cello suites. It is thought that the manuscript dates no earlier than 1723. Some scholars suggest the year 1727, like the Wiener Urtext edition. Another source is handwritten from one of Bach's pupils, Georg Gottfried Wagner. It is likely he copied the score sometime between 1723 and 1726 in Leipzig. This source was once in possession of pianist George Pilchow. Eventually, the manuscript found its way to the Staatsbibliothek zu Berlin in the Polchow collection. Another copy was made by Johann Peter Kellner, a German organist, composer, and collector of Bach's works. This source only contains parts of the sonatas and partitas, 3 sonatas and a few movements from the second and third partita. Substantial deviations from the other sources reduce the manuscript's reliability. A final manuscript was made in Curtin, presumed to be organist Emmanuel Liberet Gottschalk, in or around 1720. It is based on Bach's manuscript. A second person is to have thought to completed the notes and added extra articulation markings. Johann Sebastian Bach was the 8th and youngest child in his family. His father, Johann Ambrosius Bach, likely taught him violin and basic music theory. His mother and father died before he was 10. After his parents died, Johann Sebastian moved in with his eldest brother, Johann Christoph Bach. Johann Christoph exposed the young Johann Sebastian to some of the great composers of the day, some of which include Johann Pachelbel, Johann Jacob Froberger, Jean-Baptiste Lully, Louis Marchand, Marin Marais, and Girolamo Frescobaldi. In 1708, Bach returned to Weimar. It is clear by this period Bach familiarized himself with works written by violinists of the time: Antonio Vivaldi, Arcangelo Corelli, George Philip Telemann, and Giuseppe Torelli, to name a few. A list of his archived transcriptions are shown here. Johann Paul Westhoff was a German Baroque composer and violinist. One of the most important exponents of the Dresden Violin School, he was among the highest-ranked violinists of his day and composed some of the earliest known music for solo violin. He worked as a musician and composer as a member of the Dresden Hofkapelle from 1674 to 1697, and at the Weimar court from 1699 to 1705. Westhoff wrote 6 suites for solo violin, which marked the beginning of the performance repertoire for the instrument. They are the first known multi-movement works for solo violin, and as such, their importance and influence can hardly be overestimated. Their publication, in 1683 of one suite, and in 1696 of the set of 6 suites, are for certain to have been known to Johann Sebastian Bach, and must have influenced his 3 sonatas and 3 partitas for solo violin. In the beginning of his suite in A minor, Westhoff introduces a long, short theme with dotted gallop-like rhythms. Note the counterpoint in his use of double, triple, and quadruple stops almost instantly, making use of all strings available on the violin. Note the chromatic nature of the opening of the Gigue and how Westhoff develops the music as it goes on. See how this compares to the opening of Bach's fugues in A minor and C major upon the entries of the chromatic counter subjects. The opening of Westhoff's suite in B-flat major introduces a stepwise alternating ascent-descent bass line. Notice the similarities of this writing to the opening of the Allemande from Bach's B minor partita. Johann Georg Pisendel was a German Baroque musician, violinist, and composer who for many years led the court orchestra in Dresden, at the time known as the finest instrumental ensemble in Europe. Pisendel met Bach on his way to Leipzig and Weimar in 1709. Pisendel was also introduced to Georg Philipp Telemann and was an enthusiastic member of the student Collegium Musicum founded by Telemann. Telemann and Pisendel became close friends. Pisendel's compositions are few in number, but high in quality. Pisendel's music takes influence from the Italian school, but is also injected with a German Baroque style. He wrote a solo violin sonata in A minor, which is suggested as an influence in Bach's own solo writing for violin. This sonata has a lot in common, both technically and harmonically, with Bach's solo violin sonatas and partitas. Pisendel's violin sonata begins simply and slowly in the first bar, and unfolds, introducing more melismatic gestures around larger harmonic and rhythmic pillars. There appear to be similarities, particularly in the melisma and pillar-like writing of this music in Bach's G minor sonata and A minor sonata. In the second movement, marked Allegro, Pisendel uses small motivic cells that Bach uses all the time. These slurring pairs are also very commonly seen in Bach's solo violin sonatas and partitas. Compare the codas at the end of these movements by Pisendel and Bach. Both are very similar to each other, but Pisendel starts his on the key of the 5th scale degree, and Bach starts his in the home key. These are a few of my findings based on the seemingly endless discovery of various influences and historical factors that led to the creation of Johann Sebastian Bach's 6 sonatas and partitas for solo violin. I hope you all found this video enjoyable and were able to learn something new. Like and subscribe for more content like this in the future.